These Viking facts are so wild, they'll shatter everything you think you know about history. Some are so shocking, you'll wonder if they're even real. But once you hear them, there's no going back. Welcome to the untold truth of the Vikings. The Vikings lived in a world built on ranks. The top were kings and chiefs, rich with land and servants. Freemen worked their farms, traded goods, and crafted tools that kept their lands alive. Beneath them were slaves, bound to serve and never free to leave. Together, they powered a society that thrived on strength and survival. From these powerful landowners rose the warlords, men who ruled their own territories with loyal armies. Over time, ambition turned chiefs into kings. By 1050 AD, each Viking land bowed to a single ruler, the strongest of them all. One of them was Eric Bloodaxe, when his father, the king of Norway, died in 930 AD. Eric chose power over blood. He killed his brothers and claimed the throne alone. His reign was as brutal as his name. Not long after came King Harald Bluetooth. Ruling Denmark from 935 to 985, he turned from the old gods to Christianity. He built a church at Jelling, moved his parents' remains there, and raised the Great Jelling Stone, a monument carved with beasts locked in eternal battle, a symbol of good and evil. Then came King Canute, a ruler whose empire stretched across England, Denmark, and Norway by 1028. Yet, standing before the sea, he commanded the waves to stop. When they didn't, he said only God could. A king who ruled half of Europe, but still knew his limits. And across these kingdoms walked men with names that echoed their deeds: Forkbird, Skullsplitter, Barelegs, Falsmouth the Stout. Their names were their legacy, and their legacy was power. The Vikings ruled the seas with their ships, masterpieces carved from oak and built for purpose. Cargo ships carried goods, slow and heavy. Riverboats ferried people across calm waters. But the pride of the fleet was the dragger, the dragon ship. Long, narrow, and swift, it sliced through waves like a blade, its carved dragon head warning everyone that trouble had arrived. Out in open water, there were no maps or radios, just stars and instincts. Viking sailors watched the sun by day and the constellations by night, tracing their path across endless waves. They read the winds, the pull of currents, even the flight of seabirds, turning nature into their compass. To build their ships, craftsmen searched forests for giants, trees tall and straight enough to serve as keels and masts, oak for the hull, pine for the mast, ash and birch for strength. Every plank was nailed and overlapped, every curve designed for speed. A Viking ship wasn't just transport, it was art built for war. With ships ready came the pirates. King Svein Forkbird of Denmark led fleets that demanded gold to spare England. Each time he threatened a raid, the English paid him dangled. Gold for peace that never lasted long. The more they paid, the more he came back. Viking nobles did the same, gathering warriors for raids on villages and monasteries. They took treasure, burned what they couldn't carry, and sailed home with gold and captives to sell as slaves. Along Europe's coastlines, fear had a name: the Vikings were coming. But to them, death was no curse. Glory mattered more than years. They believed that dying in battle meant entering Valhalla, the great hall of the gods, where fallen warriors feasted forever. Among them were the Berserkias, men who wore animal skins, worked themselves into a trance, and stormed the battlefield like beasts. They howled, bit their shields, and tore through enemies without fear. From them came the word berserk and the legend of unstoppable rage. In war, every lord led his own men. There were no national armies, just loyalty and reward. Warriors fought for silver arm rings, gold spoils, or a place in their leader's saga. And for those warriors, one treasure meant more than gold: their sword. Forged from layered iron, double-edged and deadly, it was given a name like Sharp Biter, and often buried with its master. In their hands gleamed steel, and on their shields shone pride, the mark of men who would rather die than be forgotten. Far from home, Viking warriors built camps and forts to survive their endless wars. Wooden huts stood behind walls of timber and earth, sheltering men who fought for silver and glory. Each soldier brought his own weapons. The poor carried spears and leather shields, while the wealthy flashed iron helmets and sharp swords. And while men fought, Viking women marched beside them, not with blades, but with bandages and food, keeping armies alive from behind the lines. But not every Viking journey was about war. Some traded instead, turning seas and deserts into roads. They sailed through icy rivers in Russia, then dragged their ships across frozen ground. Farther south, they rode camels through burning deserts on their way to Constantinople and Jerusalem, the Vikings on camels, carrying ships on their backs, chasing gold across continents. To trade, they carried silver in tiny scales, weighing wealth one sliver at a time. There were no banks, no coins that worked everywhere, just chunks of precious metal passed from hand to hand. What they brought home was worth the miles. Wheat and cloth from Britain, wine from France, glass from Germany, jewelry from Russia, and spices from the East. Their ships came back loaded with the world, as rich as proof that even pirates had a taste for fine shopping. Some didn't come back at all. They stayed where they landed, founding towns from Scotland to Sicily. Sometimes they fought for the land. Other times they blended in, building lives beside the very people they once raided. Eric the Red went further. Around 983 AD, he reached a cold, empty island of ice and stone and called it Greenland. The name was a lie, but a clever one. In 986, hopeful settlers followed him, only to find endless frost. By the time they realized the trick, turning back wasn't an option. That same year, another sailor, Bjarni Herjulfsson, got lost in a storm and spotted new land far west. He didn't stop, but years later, Leif Erikson did. Reached lands he called Helgeland, Markland, and Vinland, now known as North America. The Vikings had discovered a new world, by pure accident. Back home, not all greatness came from the sword. Viking craft workers of the 700s and 800s built homes, tools, and art that rivaled any in Europe. In the frozen north, their longhouses sheltered both families and animals under one roof, built on slopes so waste flowed away. Clever, practical, and made to last. In harsher lands like Iceland and the Orkneys, where trees were rare, they built from the earth itself. Walls of turf and stone held the cold at bay, and driftwood became furniture. Grass grew on their roofs, warmth stayed inside, and life continued. Proof that Vikings could conquer not just seas and kingdoms, but nature itself. Viking homes were warm, but not in a good way. With no windows to keep out the cold, their longhouses turned into smoky caves. Fires burned on open hearths, filling rooms with thick fumes. The air was so bad it caused chest diseases, and sometimes the deadly gas from dying fires poisoned people in their sleep. Still, they called it cozy heat from animals doubled as central heating. Inside, life was simple. Furniture was scarce. Luxury meant owning a bed. Most sat on wooden benches and ate from trestle tables. The house owner claimed the high seat marked by carved posts, a throne of respect at the center of home life. Guests of honor sat opposite, and everyone else just filled the gaps. Beyond the walls, farming defined survival. In the rocky northern soil, crops struggled to grow, so livestock mattered most. Sheep and cattle gave milk, meat, and wool, and their grazing pastures were worth more than fields of grain. Grass meant life, and every patch of green was guarded fiercely. When crops did grow, they were practical. Hay was gold for winter cut, dried and stored to feed animals through snow. And flax grew in damp ground, woven by women into fine linen to wear beneath itchy wool clothes. Everything had purpose, nothing went to waste. For food, the sea was their ally. Viking fishermen braved cold waters to catch cod, herring, salmon, and trout. They hauled in eels from rivers and gathered mussels and oysters along the shore. Some hunted whales for blubber, while others scaled cliffs to steal seabird eggs or crept onto rocky skerries to club seals and walruses. Every catch meant another meal, another day alive. The deep forests of Norway and Sweden, trappers hunted for more than food. Bears, wolves, and foxes were prized for their fur warm in winter, valuable in trade. Deer gave meat, hides, and antlers that became beads and combs. To the Vikings, even nature was a market, and every animal was part of their survival. Viking life ran on rhythm, even their meals followed it. They ate twice a day. The morning began with the day meal, a simple spread of barley bread, oat cakes, butter, and cheese. The night meal came early in the evening, meat or fish when they had it, wild berries in summer, all served on wooden plates or stone bowls. The rich lifted silver cups, the poor drank from clay beakers, and the warriors, they preferred hollow cattle horns. Light and unbreakable, perfect for men, always ready to sail or fight. Those horns came alive during feasts. Vikings drank milk, ale brewed from barley, and mead made of honey, their favorite. Rich nobles had silver goblets. Everyone else managed fine with wood or pottery. But when warriors gathered, cattle horns filled with ale passed from hand to hand, and pride was measured by how long a man could drink before passing out. Cooking was as rugged as the people. Few homes had ovens, so women boiled meat in iron cauldrons or in pits filled with water heated by red-hot stones. It was simple, fast, and clever, and kept the clan fed through the coldest months. Their favorite dish? Blood sausage, fresh animal blood mixed with heart, liver, and lungs, stuffed into sheep intestines, then boiled with garlic or cumin. Vikings loved it more than vegetables, which they treated like decoration on the side. And when there was victory, or a wedding, or just enough reason to forget the cold, the feasting began. For days, sometimes weeks, food piled high, ale flowed endlessly, and music filled smoky halls. Warriors, families, and lords all sat together, eating, laughing, and drinking, until nothing was left but stories. Viking women stood strong in a world built for warriors. While their husbands sailed or fought, they ruled the home front, running farms, managing slaves, weaving clothes, raising children, and making every decision that kept life moving. They spun wool into warm cloth on tall looms, stitched garments that could survive a storm, and kept entire households alive through brutal winters. Independence wasn't granted to them, they simply took it. Marriage, though, told another story. Man needed a woman's father's permission to wed her and had to pay for the privilege. The woman's opinion didn't matter. Only widows truly chose their next husband. Yet even within those rigid walls, Viking women found power. Yet the law gave them the right to divorce cruel men, a freedom rare in their time. Age brought another kind of authority. Few lived past 50, but those who did were treated as keepers of wisdom. Their advice guided families and settled disputes. But when illness came and strength faded, respect turned to pity. In a world that worshipped power, frailty found no place. Even childhood was ruled by harshness. Fathers decided who lived or died. A healthy baby was sprinkled with water and named into the family. A weak or sickly one was left outside to freeze, a cold choice for a cold world. The children who survived learned early. Life in the north belonged only to the strong. Viking childhood began at home, not in school. Girls learned early cooking, weaving, milking animals, fetching water, and gathering wood or berries. Every task prepared them to run a household someday. Boys followed their fathers to farms and workshops, learning to ride, craft, and fight. By 15, a Viking boy was expected to hold his own in battle. Playtime often meant sparring with wooden swords. Childhood ended quickly in the north. To survive the cold, Vikings dressed in layers. Women wore long wool or linen dresses with overdresses on top. Men wrapped tunics over shirts and wool pants beneath cloaks. Everyone wore gloves, socks, and leather shoes. Men added fur caps, women, headscarves and shawls. And though their lands were harsh, their fashion wasn't. Vikings loved bright colors and braided patterns, proof that even warriors had style. Warmth came not just from wool, but from the wild. Cloaks were trimmed with fur or stuffed with goose feathers for insulation. Farmers made thick sheepskin coats, rough, heavy, and warm enough to face any winter storm. Brooches were as practical as they were beautiful. Men fastened cloaks with large round pins, while women used matching pairs to hold their overdresses. A third brooch might secure a cloak at the neck, and some carried chains for keys, the mark of a woman running a household. Jewelry wasn't just decoration, it was status. Rings and armbands shimmered on both men and women. Warriors earned theirs through bravery. Kings gifted them as rewards, and merchants flaunted them as proof of fortune. Each piece of silver or gold told a story of loyalty, courage, or conquest. Vikings even brought color to their legend. Red and green were their favorites, woven into fine cloths decorated with silk, ribbon, and gold thread. And in true Viking fashion, they didn't waste. They imported shiploads of broken glass from Germany just to melt it down into beads. turning shards into treasure. The Vikings may have terrified Europe, but oddly enough, they were too clean for English taste. Their neighbors complained that they washed too often, changed clothes too frequently, and combed their hair like it was a national duty. Once a week, they poured water over red-hot stones, sat in the rising steam, whipped their skin with birch twigs, then plunged into cold pools. What others called vanity, the Vikings called hygiene, and centuries later, Scandinavia still calls it a sauna. Clean or not, they kept life practical. Most homes had simple outdoor toilets, wooden seats over holes in the ground, walls woven from twigs, and dried moss for toilet paper. But warriors on campaign couldn't afford privacy. They went in groups of 4, swords drawn, guarding one another even in their most human moments. Medicine was equally creative. If a man was stabbed in the stomach, comrades fed him onion porridge and waited. If his wounds smelled of onions, they knew it pierced his gut, and his fate was sealed. Brutal but effective in its own way, yet not all Viking healing was grim. Some turned to faith, carving runes into bone or wood to ease pain and sickness. They placed charms under pillows or etched symbols onto women's hands during childbirth. Maybe it was magic, or maybe belief itself was the cure. And yes, the same warriors who drank from horns and split skulls also wore makeup. Eyeliner, made from soot or crushed berries, darkened their eyes. They thought it made them look stronger, and apparently it worked. Hair was a matter of pride too. Women wore theirs long loose before marriage, then tied it neatly once wed. Men preferred short hair at the back and long fringes in front, sometimes braided to keep their vision clear while fighting. Even in battle, they made sure to look fierce and fashionable. But the Vikings were indeed just warriors or raiders. They were a strange mix of brutality and refinement. They could burn a village before breakfast and take a steam bath by noon. Clean, proud, and unshakably human, the Northmen left behind more than scars. They left style, courage, and the world's first recorded case of too much self-care. The Vikings lived in a world without machines, where everything began and ended with their own hands. Families built their homes, carved their furniture, shaped farm carts, stitched clothes, and even made toys for their children. Nothing came easy, and nothing came from anywhere else. Every object was slow-born from skill, patience, and survival. Iron kept their world running, and blacksmiths were its lifeblood. Many men had small forges at home, heating metal over open fires to fix tools or weapons. But when work demanded more skill, traveling smiths rode from farm to farm, their hammers echoing through the countryside, the sound of civilization being forged one spark at a time. Even bones found new life. After meals, leftover animal bones and deer antlers became combs, beads, pins, and weaving tools. For poorer Vikings, these were treasures, proof that beauty didn't have to come from silver, just clever hands and a sharp knife. On cliff faces where soapstone ran deep, craftsmen carved bowls and cups straight into the rock before cutting them free. It saved them from hauling heavy stone and gave each piece the mark of the land it came from, part art, part endurance. And then there were the silversmiths, masters of detail and precision. They pressed intricate designs into metal sheets, filled engraved lines with black niello, or twisted silver wires into strong, shining rings. Their brooches fastened cloaks, their necklaces crowned warriors and queens. Every curve, every line told the same story, that even a people known for blood and raids understood grace, craftsmanship, and beauty in their purest form. As Viking power grew, kings realized trade was worth more than plunder. In the early days, merchants only met once or twice a year at open-air fairs. So kings built towns, permanent centers where trade could thrive all year. Farmers brought goods, merchants brought silver, and kings collected taxes. What began as beach markets soon became the beating hearts of Viking wealth. But wealth attracted danger. Raiders from Russia and northern Germany sailed across the Baltic to seize what others built. To protect trade, kings raised earthen banks, built wooden walls, and stationed warriors at every gate. The same hands that carved ships now carved fortresses. Those walls, life changed. Space was tight, so houses stood shoulder to shoulder, smaller than countryside homes. Most were built from timber with straw thatch and smoke-stained walls. Beneath those roofs, Craftsmen worked, forging, weaving, carving, selling their work right from their doorsteps. Trade brought something new: coins. Before the Viking Age, silver was weighed, not minted. Traders carried scales and chopped bits of metal for payment. But by 825 AD, in the town of Hiddeby, craftsmen began making coins of their own, small discs of silver stamped with ships and kings. Soon, other towns followed, and Viking trade stepped into a new era. That hunger for commerce stretched far beyond Scandinavia. Viking traders sailed east, up the great rivers of Europe, founding towns like Staraja, Ladaga, Novgorod, and Kiev. Locals called them Rus, the rowers. From that single word came a new name for their land: Russia. From raiders to rulers, the Vikings built not just kingdoms, but commerce, their oars steering both war and trade. Their legacy echoing through history and geography alike. The Vikings lived by a code sharper than their swords. Honor was everything. Men and women alike guarded their reputation with pride. To be called a liar or coward was worse than death itself. Loyalty bound them together. Oaths were sacred, and a handshake sealed every promise. In their world, one S-word was a weapon, and breaking it left a stain that no victory could wash away. But when words failed, blood answered. Disputes between families often turned into feuds that burned for months, sometimes years. An insult demanded revenge. A killing demanded another, until both sides grew weary enough to trade silver for peace. For the Vikings, justice wasn't always about law. Sometimes it was about balance. Still, there was law, just not on paper. Every rule was carried in memory, spoken aloud by the law speaker. Once a year, he recited them before the people so no one could claim ignorance. His voice held the weight of justice, and his wisdom often guided kings. In a world of swords and raids, knowledge itself was a crown. Each year, every free man gathered at the Thing, the great open-air assembly. It was court, council, and marketplace in one. Their criminals were fined, new laws were made, and feuds were settled, at least until the next one began. Traders set up stalls, families reunited, and distant farmers heard the news of the realm. It was chaos and order rolled into one, the Viking way of democracy under open skies. Yet for all their order, mercy was rare. Life in the north allowed no weakness. Thieves swung from ropes, and those who defied justice were cast out, outlawed, stripped of home and name, alone without family or fire. Exile was a slow death. In the Viking world, survival demanded strength, loyalty, and an iron will, because weakness wasn't just shameful, it was fatal. For all their battles and bloodshed, the Vikings knew how to celebrate life loudly. At feasts, long halls filled with music, laughter, and dancing. The songs praised gods and heroes. The ale loosened voices, and the more they drank, the wilder the steps became. Kings and lords even hired dancers, jugglers, and clowns to keep their guests entertained between roasts and toasts. When swords rested, stories of dragons, elves, and monsters took over every song, another echo of the Viking soul. Their humor was as sharp as their blades. They loved jokes, riddles, and clever tricks, especially tales where gods outsmarted their enemies. Board games like chess and Hennefoto filled long nights, but patience wasn't a Viking virtue. Losers often reached for weapons before admitting defeat, proof that even playtime came with danger. Summer brought its own kind of contest. Stripped to light clothes, men raced, swam, and leaped to prove strength and speed. Winter turned rivers into skating grounds and fields into tracks for skiing. No season wasted, no body left untrained. Every game was a rehearsal for war. Even their myths reflected their humor. One famous story told of Thor, the mighty god with thunder in his hands, dressing up as a bride to trick a giant and steal back his stolen hammer. A god in a veil, pretending to wed, the Vikings loved their heroes fierce, but never humorless. Sports weren't just fun, they were training. Throwing spears, shooting arrows, and sparring with swords built muscle and precision. Boys grew into warriors through games that tested both aim and courage. And when competition wasn't enough, they turned to raw strength. Wrestling was a crowd favorite, brutal and real, a warrior's skill without his weapons. But nothing thrilled them like horse fights, where stallions clashed with hooves and teeth while men roared from the sidelines. Violence wasn't just part of their world, it was their entertainment. their ritual, and their way of reminding themselves what survival looked like. The Viking world was ruled by gods as fierce and unpredictable as the people who worshipped them. Their sky gods, the Aesir, included Odin, the All-Wise, Thor, the Thunder Wielder, and Tyr, the one-handed god of war. Loki, the trickster, brought chaos wherever he went, a reminder that even gods could be troublemakers. The Vanir, gods of earth and sea, gave life instead of death. Injured ruled the waves, while Frey and his sister Freya blessed the land with fertility, love, and beauty. Odin rode an 8-legged horse with 2 ravens, thought and memory always circling him, while Freya, graceful and deadly, rode in a chariot drawn by cats. To please their gods, Vikings made sacrifices, not in words, but in blood. Animals and sometimes people were offered to earn favor in war or weather. The gods demanded life, and the Vikings obeyed. Sharing feasts of meat and calling them blood offerings, meals between mortals and gods, yet behind every offering was fate, a power even the gods couldn't escape. The Norns' 3 mysterious sisters sat beneath Yggdrasil, the great tree that held the universe together. There they spun the thread of destiny, weaving every life's beginning and end. They visited each newborn, set their path, and once chosen, no one, not even Odin, could change it. Death, too, had its destinations. The bravest warriors fell into Valhalla, Odin's hall, where they drank, feasted, and prepared for the final battle of the gods. Freya welcomed the noble and unmarried to her meadowed home. But most souls, farmers, fishermen, mothers, children, went to Niflheim, the cold kingdom of hell. Shrouded in fog and silence, for the Vikings, even death had hierarchy. And then change came from the south. Missionaries from England, Germany, and France arrived, carrying crosses instead of axes. The Vikings resisted at first. No one traded Odin for sermons icily. But by around AD 1000, kings like Harald Bluetooth and Olaf Tryggvason saw power in the new faith. They built churches, baptized followers, and merged gods with glory. The Age of Thunder faded, the cross rose, and the Vikings, once led by Odin's ravens, began to follow the bells of Christendom. To the Vikings, death in battle was not an end. It was a story worth retelling forever. They honored fallen heroes through sagas, long, detailed tales of bravery, voyages, and vengeance. Told first around firelight and passed through generations by memory alone, these stories kept the dead alive. Centuries later, they were finally written down, preserving the thunder and blood of the Viking Age in ink and legend. At the heart of every feast stood the skald, the poet of kings. He sang of victories, carved pride into verse, and turned battles into music. With a harp or a lyre in hand, he gave voice to the glories of his lord and the gods themselves. His words could lift a warrior's name to immortality or bury a coward in silence. But even amid their songs, the Vikings feared one ending: they couldn't fight Ragnarok, the doom of gods and men. They believed one day the world would fall into chaos. Giants and monsters would rise, the gods would meet them in battle, and even mighty Thor and Odin would fall. The skies would burn, seas would rise, and the old world would die only for a new one to rise from its ashes. They didn't just fear monsters, they lived among them in imagination. To them, the forests and seas were full of spirits, elves who blessed crops and children, and giants who devoured men. Every storm and shadow held something alive. To keep evil away, they carved monster heads onto ships and stones, believing the beasts would scare darker things into retreat. Still, not all magic was dreadful. Warriors and farmers alike wore amulets shaped like Thor's hammer, small pendants of silver and faith. To fighters, it gave strength and courage. To farmers, it promised good harvests and healthy herds. The symbol of the thunder god hung close to every Viking heart, a reminder that luck, like courage, was something you carried into battle. For the Vikings, death was not silence. It was a journey. In the earliest days, they sent their dead to the afterlife through fire. Great pyres burned under the northern sky, carrying smoke and souls toward the gods. The ashes were gathered with care, sealed in urns, and buried. But by the 800s, the flames began to fade. Instead of burning their dead, some Vikings began laying bodies in the earth, whole and waiting for the next world. They believed no soul should travel empty-handed. Warriors were buried with weapons, armor, and even their horses, and in some dark tales, with their wives or slaves forced to follow them into death. Wealthy women were sent off with jewels, fine clothes, and tools for weaving. The same skills that once kept their homes alive now carried into eternity. Every grave was a suitcase for the soul. Centuries later, those graves still speak. Archaeologists have found ornaments, pottery, weapons, and even fragments of fabric, things the dead once held. In some places, entire ships were found buried beneath soil or preserved underwater. Their timbers intact, their cargo eternal. Each one is a frozen story, a map of how the living honored their dead. To the Vikings, ships weren't just for the sea, they were for the soul. Many burials were shaped like vessels, outlined in stones stretching hundreds of feet. The dead were placed at the center, their spirits believed to sail through the afterlife, just as they once sailed across oceans. For the great and powerful, actual ships were used, set ablaze or buried whole, glowing red against the dusk, before sinking into legend. Even in death, respect ruled. Bodies were washed, dressed, and wrapped in cloth or birch bark. It wasn't just ritual, it was fear. The Vikings believed that mistreating the dead might bring them back, restless and angry, so they sent them away clean, clothed, and honored, not out of tenderness, but out of caution. Because even for the bravest warriors, nothing was more feared than the dead who refused to stay gone. The Vikings left traces more mysterious than bones. In some burial sites, the acid soil ate away wood and skeleton alike, yet what remained were perfect shadows in the ground, ghostly outlines where ships and bodies once lay. These silent imprints had become a map for archaeologists, proof that even when the Vikings vanished, they refused to disappear completely. For all their skill in war and craft, most Vikings couldn't read or write. Words were carried by memory, not ink. Family stories, laws, and history survived through speech alone, passed from one mouth to the next. They all spoke one language, Dansk Tunga, the Danish tongue, until around AD 1000, when it began to split into the different Nordic dialects still spoken today. But for those who did write, there were runes, sharp, simple lines carved into wood, bone, and stone. 16 letters made up their alphabet, enough to label weapons, track trade, or mark graves. They didn't need paper. It had iron points and steady hands. Straight cuts only easy to carve, impossible to forget. Runes weren't just words, they were power. Some carried secret messages, others held spells. Vikings believed a carved rune could strengthen a sword, heal a wound, or curse an enemy. Even now, some rune inscriptions remain unreadable, their meanings lost like whispers to time. The rich immortalized their lives in stone. Skilled carvers etched runes into great slabs, telling stories of warriors, kings, and families. Some honored the dead. Others bragged of victories because even in memory, reputation mattered. These rune stones stood in public places, towering messages from the past that said, "I lived, I conquered. Remember me." When words weren't enough, the Vikings let pictures speak. Across their lands, they carved great slabs of stone covered in scenes of battle, voyages, and gods. These picture stones showed not just how people lived, but how they wanted to be remembered, heroes riding to Valhalla, ships cutting through waves, monsters lurking at the edges of fate. Some celebrated victories, others mourned the lost. Each one was both story and farewell, carved in stone so time couldn't erase their glory. But even legends fade. After centuries of raids and rule, Viking power finally began to crumble. By the early 1000s, kings across Europe struck back. In Ireland, Brian Boru broke Viking dominance at the Battle of Clontarf in 1014. In England, Viking rule ended in 1042. The kings of Norway held parts of Scotland for a while longer. The islands of Orkney and Shetland stayed under Norse hands until the 1400s. Yet by then, the great age of Viking conquest had already slipped into history. Still, the conquerors didn't vanish, they adapted. In many lands, Vikings stopped fighting and started living. They married locals, shared language and customs, and built homes beside the people they once raided. Over time, the borders between Viking and native blurred. Only in untouched places like Iceland or the Orkney Islands did Viking culture stay pure, preserved like ice in the north. Then came the faith that ended the old world. Christian missionaries preached in the Viking homelands, and to the shock of many, they survived. So did the Vikings who converted. When Thor's lightning failed to strike them down, people began to doubt the old gods. Slowly, the hammers gave way to crosses, and churches rose where temples once stood. Odin's halls grew quiet, replaced by the ringing of church bells. Yet the Vikings left their mark far beyond their own shores. They founded kingdoms across Europe in Russia's Novgorod, France's Normandy, new lands ruled by Norse hands that eventually forgot their origins. They created laws, cultures, and nations that would outlive their longships. Even across the ocean, their courage carried them too far, to America itself. Around a D-1000, Thorfinn Karlsefni led over 100 settlers to Vinland, the same coast Leif Erikson had discovered. But after 2 short years, the native peoples fought back, forcing the Vikings to retreat. The dream of a Norse America ended there, washed away by resistance and distance. Still, their bloodline continued. In 1066, their descendants, the Normans, invaded England, bringing with them the ships, steel, and spirit of their ancestors. The age of Vikings was over, but their legacy, carved in stone, written in runes, and carried in history, never truly died. Even after their longships vanished from the seas, the Vikings never truly left us. Their language, legends, and spirit quietly slipped into our everyday lives. Take the days of the week: Wednesday for Woden, Thursday for Thor, and Friday for Freya. The gods may have fallen silent, but the calendar still whispers their names. And in Scandinavia, Saturday literally means bath day, a nod to the Vikings' weekly steam sessions, proof they were cleaner than most of medieval Europe. Their words still live on our tongues. Common things, sister, knife, egg, all came from the Norse language. Even the map remembers them. Thorpe for a farm, Firth for a river mouth, Kirkwall for a church bay. The Vikings named the land, and the land never forgot. Their stories traveled too far enough to reach Shakespeare himself. Over 500 years after the Viking Age, he borrowed a Danish legend to write Hamlet, the story of a prince torn by vengeance and doubt. A Viking tale reborn on an English stage, proving that even poetry owed something to the North. And their fire still burns in festivals. In the Shetland Isles, descendants of Norse settlers still celebrate Uphelliaw, ending winter with a torchlit parade and the burning of a full-sized Viking ship. Smoke, song, and flame, just as their ancestors did 1,000 years ago. Even Christmas carries a trace of them. The Vikings celebrated Yule, a midwinter feast of fire, gifts, and gods who rode across the sky bringing good fortune. Sound familiar? Santa Claus may wear red now, but his roots stretch back to Odin himself, a bearded wanderer flying through the winter night, trading thunder for cheer. The Vikings are gone, but they're still here, in our words, our stories, our holidays, and even in the days we count. Their ships may rest beneath the earth, but their legacy sails on, quietly steering the modern world.
That's all for today. Subscribe to Factopia for more amazing and bizarre facts. Stay curious and keep exploring.